Stop crying. You're not going to the hospital. Those were the words that froze my blood that night. I had fallen hard on the wooden floor of my barn, my hips screaming with pain, the taste of dust and iron filling my mouth. I tried to reach for the phone on the wall, but Vanessa's hand was already there, pulling the cord free, her face calm, almost amused. My son Nathan stood behind her, his eyes darting away from mine as if ashamed, but he did not move. I lay there clutching my side, breath shallow, and heard her laugh softly. "You will sign the land papers, Clara. 1,250 acres. All of it. Until then, you stay right here." That was the moment I realized my daughter-in-law wanted me broken more than she wanted me healed. I pressed my palms against the cold floor, trying to push myself upright, but pain shot through my body and I collapsed again. Vanessa leaned over me, her perfume mixing with the smell of hay, her smile sharp as a blade. "You are old. Doctors cost money. That farm is the only thing of value left, and it belongs to us now. Do you really think anyone will care if you hurt for a while?" I bit back a scream, refusing to give her the satisfaction. My son finally stepped forward, but instead of helping me, he took the keys from my pocket and slipped them into his own. "Mum, just listen to her. We are starting a new life. Don't make this harder than it has to be." My whole life I had believed that raising a child alone, pouring every ounce of my strength into keeping a family farm alive, would mean something. But in that moment, lying broken on the barn floor while my own flesh and blood took sides with the woman who enjoyed my pain, I knew I had been wrong. Vanessa crossed her arms, her swollen belly pushing against her dress. "We will come back tomorrow. You will sign, or you will regret it for more than you do now." She left the barn light burning as they walked out together. The slam of the heavy door echoed like a final insult. I stayed on the floor for hours, the pain rolling in waves. At 70 years old, I had weathered storms, droughts, and loneliness, but nothing had cut me like hearing my son stand silent while his wife smirked over my suffering. Every creak of the rafters sounded like a clock ticking down. If I called for help, no one would hear me. If I gave in, the farm my parents and grandparents had bled for would vanish into greedy hands. When I finally crawled back into the house, dragging myself inch by inch, the silence felt heavier than any storm I had ever known. The photographs of my late husband and my younger Nathan seemed to watch me from the walls, their smiles frozen in time, mocking the reality that now I was utterly alone. I lowered myself into my armchair, sweat dripping from my brow, my hip throbbing, and whispered to the empty room. She smiled while I begged. The humiliation was worse than the pain. It wasn't just that Vanessa had refused to let me seek care. It was that she had enjoyed it, relished it, as if my agony was proof of her power. I could still see the curve of her lips when she turned to Nathan and said, "She will give in tomorrow. Watch her." And my son had nodded. I knew then this was not just about land. This was about control, about erasing me from the story of my own life. That farm was worth millions, yes, but it was also my soul, my legacy, the last promise I had made to my husband before he died. To surrender it now would be to admit that all those nights working double shifts, all those mornings rising before dawn to milk cows and mend fences, had been wasted. I sat in the dark house until dawn, clutching the armrest of my chair, each breath a battle against the stabbing pain. And yet beneath the misery, something harder began to stir. If Vanessa thought breaking my body would break my will, she was wrong. If Nathan thought I was too weak to fight back, he had forgotten who raised him. My voice was hoarse, but I spoke aloud to the quiet room, steady and certain. Tomorrow, you will see. You will both see. I had no plan yet, no strength in my bones, but I had something stronger. The fire of a woman who had been betrayed, humiliated, and underestimated. As the first light of morning crept across the fields outside, I made a vow. They would never take my land. They would never own my dignity. And one day soon, they would regret the moment they left me lying broken on that barn floor. By the next morning, the pain in my hip had settled into a constant dull ache, but my mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. I pulled myself to the kitchen table and stared out at the wide stretch of land through the window. 1,250 acres. That number carried weight like a stone in my chest. Every inch of it told a story. The wheat fields to the east, where my father had taught me how to walk the rows. The cattle pasture that had nearly gone dry during the drought of '77. The line of oak trees that marked the border where my husband had built our first fence with his bare hands. People in town said land was just dirt and grass until someone bought it, but for me it was flesh and bone. It was the lifeblood of 3 generations. I had signed loan papers at 20, sat in the county office at 40 to fight off developers, and refinanced again in my 50s, just to keep the place afloat. Every struggle had left its mark, and still the farm stood, steady and proud. Now Vanessa and Nathan wanted to carve it up as if it were nothing more than a bank account. They had talked about building luxury cabins on the West Ridge, about selling hunting rights to outsiders, even about splitting off parcels to real estate firms in the city. They never once mentioned the soil, the seasons, or the families who depended on the work that land provided. To them it was money, nothing more. I tried to imagine what it would feel like to watch bulldozers rip through the hayfield where I had scattered my husband's ashes. The thought made me clench the edge of the table until my fingers shook. The farm had been valued at nearly $12 million the last time an assessor came by. Vanessa had said it herself with a gleam in her eye. All this could be ours if your mother just stopped being selfish. Selfish. That was the word she used. As if living long enough to see my grandchildren should disqualify me from deciding what happened to the only home I had ever known. As if 70 years of labor and sacrifice could be erased with one signature. The phone rang around mid-morning. It was Nathan's voice, clipped and businesslike. "Mum, we're coming by after lunch. We have someone from the county who can explain how the transfer works. It will be easier for you if you agree now." He did not ask how I felt, or if I had slept, or if the pain had kept me awake. He spoke like a man preparing to close a deal. When I hung up, I took out the old ledger from the cupboard. The book was leather-bound, worn soft at the edges, filled with decades of numbers. Feed costs, cattle sales, tractor repairs, loan payments, every penny accounted for. Looking at those figures, I remembered every late night balancing bills, every morning rising before dawn to stretch dollars I barely had. I ran my finger down the page where the mortgage had finally been paid off 10 years ago. That victory had been mine alone, bought with sweat and stubbornness, and now they wanted it erased. At noon, their truck pulled into the drive. I saw the dust rise before I heard the tires crunch over gravel. Vanessa stepped out first, wearing a dress too fine for farm work and sunglasses that hid her eyes. Nathan followed, holding a folder thick with papers. They walked in without knocking. "Mom, sit down," Nathan said, placing the folder on the table. He opened it to a page already marked with a yellow tab. "This is a deed transfer. If you sign, we can move forward with our plans. The land will be in my name, and you will not have to worry about upkeep anymore." Vanessa leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Think of your grandson. He deserves a better life than watching cows wander in a field. We could build something beautiful here. Resorts, restaurants, a future. What do you need this old place for? I looked at her and then at him. My hip throbbed when I shifted in my chair. This land is not a resort, I said quietly. It is our history. Vanessa laughed under her breath. History does not pay bills. You had your time, Clara. Now it is ours. Nathan pushed the pen toward me. Mum, please, don't drag this out. For a moment, I thought about the barn, about the night before, about lying there while my daughter-in-law smiled down at me. The memory made my stomach turn. I slid the folder back across the table. Not today. Vanessa's lips tightened. She reached down and snatched the folder, tucking it under her arm. You are making this harder on yourself. But we will be back, and you will not be able to say no forever. When they left, the house grew silent again. I sat staring at the empty chair across from me, the one where Nathan had once eaten his breakfast before school, where his legs had barely reached the floor. Now he sat there like a stranger, asking me to surrender the very soil his father had died protecting. I got up slowly and walked to the back porch. The fields stretched out under the afternoon sun, golden and endless. A hawk circled overhead, and the cattle grazed in the distance. I knew then what was at stake. It was not only money, it was not even just land. It was the right to decide how the story of my family would be told. I pressed my hand against the porch rail and whispered, "They will not take this from me." That night the house felt colder than I could ever remember. I tried to rest, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard Vanessa's laugh in the barn, saw her smile when I begged for help. I shifted in the chair and pain burned through my hip until I could not stop the tears. I had lived alone for so long, and I thought I had grown used to silence. But this silence was different. It pressed down on me, heavy and cruel. By morning I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. I gripped the edge of the counter, fighting to keep balance. The door swung open without a knock. Vanessa stepped inside, carrying a tray. She set it down with a clatter, a bowl of oatmeal sloshing over the rim. "Eat," she said, her tone flat. "You need strength to sign." I looked at her hand still resting on the tray, nails painted red, the same hand that had pulled the phone cord from the wall. My stomach twisted. I did not touch the food. Nathan followed behind her, carrying another folder. He avoided my eyes. "Mum, we should not drag this out. Vanessa is right. You are in no shape to keep running this place. If you care about me, if you care about the baby, then do the right thing." I steadied myself against the counter. The right thing is protecting this farm. You think a piece of paper will make you the owner, but land does not belong to someone who sees only dollars. Vanessa crossed her arms and let out a short laugh. "Spare us the speeches. No one in town cares about your old stories. You are just being stubborn because you like control. But you are not in control anymore." The words cut deep, sharper than the pain in my bones. Control had been the only thing that kept me standing after my husband passed, the only thing that kept this farm alive when debts piled up. Now my son stood silent while his wife mocked me. They stayed long enough to watch me push the food aside. Vanessa leaned close, her voice low. "Starving yourself will not change anything. Tomorrow you will sign. The sooner you accept it, the sooner we can all move on." She lifted the tray with one hand and walked out. Nathan trailed behind her, not once turning back. When the door closed, I sank into the chair. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold my glass of water. I whispered to the empty room, "My own son cannot even look at me." The day dragged on. I tried to distract myself by writing in the old ledger. but the numbers blurred. Every tick of the clock reminded me of what they were planning. I knew they would return again, each time pressing harder. And each time I refused, they would push me deeper into humiliation until I broke. Late in the afternoon, I stepped outside to the porch, moving slowly, gripping the railing with both hands. The fields spread before me, endless and golden, but I could not see their beauty. I saw only the threat of being stripped away, of becoming a stranger on my own land. Neighbours drove by on the gravel road, their trucks raising dust, and I wondered if they already believed Vanessa's stories. She was clever, always knowing how to twist words. As the sun dipped low, I returned inside. The phone was still dead, the cord missing. They had not even bothered to return it. I tried to sleep again, but dreams came in broken flashes. I saw myself trapped in the barn, Vanessa's grin hovering over me. I woke drenched in sweat, my hip aching worse than before. When dawn came, I forced myself to the kitchen. The oatmeal from yesterday still sat in the sink, hardened into a crust. I dumped it out and washed the bowl slowly, my hands steadying with the rhythm. I realized then that this was exactly what they wanted. For me to grow weaker, to surrender, to hand over everything with a shaking hand. The sound of tires came up the drive. Another day, another confrontation. I braced myself, gripping the edge of the counter, my jaw tight. They entered without knocking again. Vanessa's eyes swept the room, sharp and cold. She dropped a new folder on the table. This is it. Final offer. Sign today, and you can stay in the house while we begin development. Refuse, and we will find another way. Nathan placed his hand on her shoulder as if to calm her, but his voice carried no warmth. Mum, you are making this harder than it needs to be. You raised me better than this. Do not let pride destroy what we could build together. I stared at him until he looked away. If you knew what pride really meant, you would not be standing there. The room grew quiet. Vanessa's smile returned, slow and deliberate. We will not wait forever. Tomorrow we come back with someone from the county again. Think about it carefully. When they left this time, I did not collapse into my chair. I stayed standing, clutching the backrest until my knuckles turned white. I had been humiliated, treated like a burden, starved of dignity in my own house. But the more they tried to strip me down, the more a fire built inside me. The farm was not just acres on paper, it was the measure of my life. And if they thought breaking my body would break my will, they did not know me at all. I sat by the window that morning, the fields stretched out in front of me like an old photograph. The ache in my hip throbbed with every small movement, but my mind drifted far from the pain. I thought about the years that had led me here, the decades spent working this land, and the promises I had made along the way. When I was 19, my father had handed me the reins of the farm for the first time. He stood by the fence, his arms crossed, watching me guide the tractor down the row. Remember, Clara, he had said, the land will give back what you put in, but it asks for everything. I had carried those words with me through droughts and storms, through lean harvests and better ones. I met my husband, Robert, a year later. He was quiet but steady, the kind of man who never left a job half done. We married in the small church down the road, and together we built a life out of sweat and soil. I remembered the way he used to whistle while fixing fences, how he would wipe his brow and smile at me like we were the richest people alive, even when our bank account said otherwise. The hardest years came after Nathan was born. Money was scarce, and we had to make choices that cut deep. I sold 24 heifers one winter just to pay the hospital bills. We ate potatoes from the root cellar for months, stretching every meal, but we never went hungry. Robert and I promised each other that Nathan would never know the fear of losing this farm. That was the vow we made. When Robert passed suddenly in his 50s, the weight of that vow fell squarely on me. I stood in the kitchen after his funeral, looking out at the same fields I had watched as a girl, and I swore I would keep the land safe. It was not just property, it was a legacy, a thread tying past to future. Nathan was only 15 then, still lanky and wide-eyed, but I knew I was carrying the burden for him too. I remembered the day he left for college, how proud I had been. I handed him a check I could barely afford to write, the savings from selling off a piece of equipment I had hoped to keep. Go make something of yourself, I told him. This farm will always be here when you come back. He hugged me tight and promised, I'll take care of you one day, Mum. I had held on to those words for years. Now, hearing his voice call me stubborn, watching him stand beside Vanessa while she mocked me, that promise felt like a cruel joke. He had once been the boy who ran barefoot across the pasture, who sat with me on the porch while Robert told stories about the old days. I wondered when that boy had disappeared. I reached for the old photo album on the shelf. The pages smelled faintly of dust and hay. There was Nathan, 10 years old, holding a calf by the rope halter, his grin wide with pride. Another picture showed Robert and me at the county fair, ribbons pinned to our shirts, Nathan on Robert's shoulders, waving to the crowd. Those moments had been real, and I clung to them as proof that love had once lived in this family. But love had not stopped Robert from dying, and it had not stopped Nathan from changing. Somewhere along the way, my son had learned to measure worth in dollars instead of values. I traced his face in the photograph with my finger, wondering how much of that boy was left inside the man who now demanded I give up everything. The afternoon light shifted across the floor, and I found myself whispering to Robert's picture on the mantel. I kept my word. I held on when we almost lost it. I worked until my hands bled. But now our own son is ready to sell it all. What did we do wrong? The silence offered no answer, only the steady creak of the house settling around me. Still, I knew deep down that I had not failed. I had done what I promised. I had kept the farm alive, through grief and debt and loneliness. If Nathan wanted to betray that, it was his choice. But I would not be the one to hand it over. That night I closed the album and set it back on the shelf. My hip ached, and my body begged for rest. But my mind was firm. The farm was not mine alone. It belonged to the generations before me, and it deserved to be protected for the generations after. Even if Nathan had turned his back on me, I could not turn mine on them. I blew out the lamp and sat in the dark for a long time, the smell of old wood and soil filling the room. I thought about the vow I had made after Robert's death. It still held power. It still guided me. And if I had to fight, I would. The next morning I woke with a clear thought in my mind. If I kept waiting, they would grind me down until I had nothing left. Vanessa's smirk, Nathan's silence, the folder of papers on my kitchen table. All of it pressed against me like a weight. I realized I could not sit here hoping they would change their minds. I had to be the one to change the game. I pulled myself up, leaning on the counter for balance, and looked out at the pasture. The land was wide and quiet, but I knew it could be taken from me if I did not act. I whispered to myself, "They think I am weak. Let them think it." That afternoon I called on Mrs. Turner, my neighbour of 30 years. She had seen me through floods, hailstorms, and the day I buried Robert. If there was anyone I could trust, it was her. She came to the door with her usual no-nonsense look, wiping flour from her hands. "Clara, you look like you have not slept in a week. What happened?" I hesitated, then told her everything. How Vanessa had kept me from calling an ambulance, how Nathan had stood by with his head down, how they wanted me to sign the farm away. Her eyes widened, her lips pressed thin. "That's criminal," she said. "You cannot let them get away with that." I nodded. "But if I fight alone, no one will believe me. Vanessa already knows how to spin her stories. She will paint me as some senile old woman who is clinging to dirt. I need proof." Mrs. Turner crossed her arms. "Then we get proof. I still have that old recorder my husband used for meetings. We can use it. And if you want, I will stand by you as a witness. I have nothing to fear from them." Relief washed over me, but it was edged with sorrow. It should have been my son standing with me, not my neighbour. Still, I thanked her and promised to keep her updated. When I got back home, I searched the barn and the kitchen for places to hide a recorder. I thought about the times Vanessa had leaned close, her voice sharp with threats, and I imagined the power of her words captured in sound. If she wanted to use my silence against me, then I would use her arrogance against her. That night, Nathan returned alone. He set another folder on the table, his eyes tired but determined. "Mum, please, do not make this harder. Vanessa is only thinking about our future. You are hurt, and you cannot keep this place running. We are giving you a way out." I stared at him, the boy I had raised, the man who now treated me like a problem to be solved. "Nathan, do you hear yourself? You are asking me to erase my life's work. Your father's, your grandfather's. Does that sound like a way out to you?" He shook his head, avoiding my eyes. "You are stuck in the past. Things change." I kept my voice steady, though my hands trembled. "If things have changed, it is because you let them. You chose her smile over your mother's pain." He flinched at that, and for a second I thought I saw the boy he used to be. But then he closed the folder, muttered, "We will talk tomorrow," and walked out into the night. I sat in the quiet house, the weight of disappointment heavier than the ache in my hip. But inside that weight was a spark of resolve. If he could not remember his own words, then I would remind him of mine. I had promised Robert I would protect the farm. I had promised myself I would not let greed win. Over the next days, I began to plan. I noted down times, conversations, every insult and threat. I marked where Vanessa left her purse when she came in, how Nathan's eyes shifted when he lied, what doors they closed and which they left open. I studied them the way I had once studied weather patterns, searching for signs of drought or flood. Mrs. Turner brought the recorder over one evening, slipping it into my hand as if we were trading secrets. "Keep it close," she said, "and do not let them know you are stronger than they think. That is your edge." I smiled for the first time in days. They think I am broken, but broken bones heal. A broken conscience does not. That night, I tucked the recorder into the pocket of my apron. When I turned out the light, I felt the same fire I had felt when Robert died and the bank threatened to take everything. I had survived that storm, and I would survive this one too. Only this time, I would not just survive. I would fight back. The following week came like a slow march. I knew they would not give up, and I knew I had to be ready. Mrs. Turner's recorder sat hidden in my apron pocket every time Nathan and Vanessa visited. Each word they spoke, every threat and insult, I carried it with me like a weapon waiting to be drawn. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the west ridge, their truck pulled into the yard again. Vanessa stepped out first, heels sinking slightly in the gravel, her eyes scanning the porch as if she already owned it. Nathan followed, carrying yet another folder of papers. They walked in without knocking, as always. Vanessa dropped the folder on the table and slid into the chair across from me. We are done waiting. Tomorrow we are taking you to the county office to sign the deed transfer. You will not stall anymore. Nathan's voice was softer, but not by much. It's for the best, Mum. You can stay here, but the land needs to be in our names. We can manage it better than you can now. I let the silence stretch. The recorder in my pocket was warm against my leg. I shifted slightly so it would catch every word. Then I looked at Vanessa. And what happens if I refuse tomorrow? Her lips curved in that same cold smile. Then you will find yourself without options. Do you really think anyone will come running to defend you? People see you as an old woman clinging to the past. We are offering you dignity. Take it. I kept my face blank, though my chest tightened at her words. Dignity is not something you give, I said slowly. It is something you keep, no matter what others try to take. Vanessa laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. We will see how much dignity you have when the county clerk stamps our papers. Nathan placed the pen on the folder and slid it toward me. Mum, just sign now. Spare yourself the trouble tomorrow. I glanced at the pen, but did not touch it. Not tonight, I said simply. Vanessa pushed back her chair hard enough to scrape the floor. Fine. Tomorrow, then. She looked at Nathan and jerked her head toward the door. We are done here. When the door shut behind them, I pulled the recorder from my pocket and set it on the table. The small red light blinked steady. I played it back just long enough to hear Vanessa's voice again, cold and certain, telling me no one would come running. It was enough. That night I wrote a letter to a lawyer whose name Mrs. Turner had given me, a man she trusted from when her own family had fought over land years ago. I wrote down every detail I could remember, every date, every threat, every cruel word. I sealed the letter and hid it beneath the ledger on the shelf. I told myself that if something happened to me, that letter would speak for me. The next morning I dressed carefully, tying my apron so the recorder rested against my hip. My body still ached, but my mind felt steady. At 10 o'clock sharp, their truck returned. Vanessa marched in first, her chin high, her eyes bright with triumph. Nathan followed, looking nervous but determined. We are going now, Vanessa said. Get your coat. The papers are waiting. I nodded as if I had no fight left. I let them guide me to the truck, every step measured, every movement deliberate. Vanessa thought she had broken me, and I let her believe it. Nathan held the door open, and I climbed in slowly, clutching the seat. The county office was a low brick building in town, the kind of place where I had filed taxes and permits for decades. Walking through those doors with Vanessa at my side felt like walking into a trap, but I kept my face calm. The clerk looked up, polite but puzzled. Vanessa strode to the counter and announced, We are here to transfer the Whitfield farm. My mother-in-law is ready to sign. The clerk glanced at me, then at the folder Vanessa thrust forward. He flipped through the papers, frowning. These forms are incomplete. You cannot transfer all 1,250 acres without additional documentation. Do you have proof of ownership for the entire tract? Vanessa's face flushed red. Of course she owns it. It is her name on the deed. The clerk shook his head. Not anymore. According to our records, 950 acres were placed in trust 2 weeks ago. The only land eligible for transfer today is 300 acres. Do you still want to proceed? Nathan turned to me, his face pale. Mum, what did you do? I kept my voice calm. I did what any responsible owner would do. I made sure the land could never be sold to people who do not care about it. Vanessa slammed her hand on the counter. You tricked us. You think this is over? The clerk cleared his throat and slid the papers back. Do you want to proceed with 300 acres or not? Nathan looked torn, his eyes darting between me and Vanessa. Finally, he shook his head. Not today. We walked out in silence, the tension heavy. Vanessa's heels clicked sharply against the pavement. She leaned close as we reached the truck, her voice low and venomous. You will regret this. But I only touched the recorder in my pocket, feeling the solid weight of it against my palm. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground firm beneath my feet. When we drove back from the county office that day, the silence in the truck was sharp enough to cut. Vanessa sat in the passenger seat, with her arms crossed tight, her lips pressed into a hard line. Nathan gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the road, as if he could will it to swallow him whole. I sat in the back, the recorder in my pocket humming like a secret flame, and let the silence weigh on them. The moment we pulled into the yard, Vanessa spun around to face me. You think you're clever, hiding the land in some trust. Do you think that makes you untouchable? Her eyes burned, but her voice was too loud, too sharp. I kept my face calm, but inside I knew this was another gift. She was giving me her anger, and I was taking every word for proof. I climbed down slowly, gripping the doorframe for balance. The land was never yours to take, I said. It belongs to those who respect it. She laughed, bitter and cruel. Respect? That dirt is worth millions, and you'd rather see it wasted than let us build a future. You are pathetic. Nathan closed the truck door harder than he needed to. Enough, he muttered, but he did not look at me. That night, as they left me alone again, I sat by the table and thought about the trap I had just set. 950 acres were safe, sealed away in trust where they could not touch them. The 300 acres left were nothing but worn-out soil, patches of weeds, and a few broken fences. To anyone else, they were a burden. But to Vanessa, who wanted to win at any cost, they would look like bait. I poured myself a glass of water and whispered to the empty room. Let them take it. Let them choke on it. The next morning, they came storming in without knocking. Vanessa dropped another stack of papers on the table, her face still red with fury. 300 acres is better than nothing. Sign, and we can at least start building something. You can keep this house, and no one has to know how stubborn you've been. Nathan stood behind her, his shoulders stiff. Mum, maybe this is the compromise. You keep your home, and we take the rest. It's fair. I looked at the papers, then at both of them. Fair is not forcing someone to sign under threat. Fair is not laughing at pain. Do you even hear yourselves anymore? Vanessa leaned close, her voice a whisper meant to cut. You will sign, whether today or tomorrow. You cannot fight forever. I kept my hands folded in my lap. We'll see. After they left, I called Mrs. Turner over. She sat across from me at the table as I explained what had happened at the county office, her eyes shining with something between outrage and pride. You bought yourself time, she said, but you need more than that. They will not stop until they are exposed. I nodded and pulled the recorder from my apron pocket. I played back Vanessa's words from the yard, the sneer in her voice, the threat hanging heavy. Mrs. Turner's lips tightened. That's enough to make people see the truth. But you need more. Catch them when they think they've already won. Her advice stuck with me. That evening, when I lay in bed, I thought about all the nights I had fought to keep the farm alive. The droughts, the loans, the death of my husband, the long winters that had nearly broken me. Each time I had survived, not by brute strength, but by patience, by waiting for the right moment to strike back. This was no different. 2 days later, Nathan returned alone. He carried a single sheet of paper, no folder this time. He set it down in front of me and sat across the table. "Mum, please. Vanessa is not going to let this go. If you give us the 300 acres, we can prove to investors that we're serious. Once we start, she'll calm down. Don't you want peace?" I studied him for a long moment. His face was drawn, tired, older than it should have been. For a flicker of a second, I wanted to believe he meant what he said. But then I remembered the barn floor, his silence while I begged, the way he let her smile at my pain. That memory hardened me again. "You want peace," I said, "but you have chosen war, and you chose the wrong side." His jaw tightened, and he looked away. He left the paper on the table and walked out without another word. When the door closed, I slid the recorder closer and whispered into it. "They think I will bend, but I will not. This is not just land. This is my life, and I will not hand it to them." The night was quiet after that, the stars sharp in the sky. I sat by the window, staring out at the fields. For the first time in weeks, I felt not only the weight of the fight, but also the thrill of it. They thought I was cornered. They thought I was done. But I had just begun. It started small, almost too small to notice. A neighbour stopped me on the road, his expression uneasy. He asked if everything was all right, then muttered something about a post online before quickly changing the subject. By the end of the week, I knew what had happened. Vanessa had taken her fight beyond the kitchen table and into the public eye. She knew exactly how to spin her story. On social media, she posted smiling pictures of herself with her hand on her pregnant belly, writing captions about how she only wanted a future for her child. She wrote that her mother-in-law was being cruel, that I refused to share the land even though I could not manage it, that I was hoarding wealth while my own family struggled. The comments piled up. Some people offered her sympathy. Others repeated her words like they were truth. When I went into town for groceries, I felt eyes on me. Whispers followed me through the aisles. A woman I had known for years glanced at my cart and muttered loud enough for me to hear. She could feed 10 families with what she has, but she chooses not to. I gripped the handle of the cart tighter and kept walking, my head held high, but my chest burned. That evening I sat at the table with Mrs. Turner, the recorder between us. She had seen the posts too. "She is painting you as the villain," she said. "And people love a simple story. A greedy old woman against a young mother. It tugs at their hearts. They do not care about the truth." I rubbed my temples. The truth will not matter if no one hears it. They will only hear her voice. Mrs. Turner leaned forward. "Then we make sure they hear yours. We keep recording. We keep gathering. When the time comes, her own words will drown her lies." 2 days later, a local reporter came to the farm. He was polite, but his questions were sharp. "Is it true you are refusing to pass down the land? That your son and his wife are struggling while you hold on to property worth millions?" His notepad waited for my words like a trap. I kept my tone even. "This land is not just property. It is my family's history. And no, I am not refusing to pass it down. I am refusing to have it stolen." He frowned, scribbled notes, and left without a smile. I knew how his article would read. The headline would not show my pain. It would show Vanessa's smile. That night, their truck came again. This time they did not bring papers. They brought their anger. Vanessa stormed through the door, her phone in her hand, the glow of the screen lighting her face. "Do you see this? Everyone agrees with me. Everyone thinks you are selfish. You cannot win, Clara. You have already lost." Nathan stood behind her, silent as ever. I met her glare with calm. Crowds do not decide what is right. Lies can spread faster than truth, but truth lasts longer. She sneered. Keep telling yourself that when the whole town turns against you. She shoved her phone toward me, scrolling through comments of strangers calling me names, saying I was heartless. Each word stung, but I kept my face steady. When they left, I sat at the table with the recorder again. I pressed play and listened to Vanessa's voice from earlier visits, her threats, her cruelty. I imagined those words playing in front of the same people who now called me selfish. My chest ached, but it was not despair this time. It was determination. The following week was worse. Flyers appeared at the market, printed with Vanessa's words about how I refused to think of the baby. Neighbours stopped waving when they drove past. Even the pastor from church called and gently suggested I think about reconciliation. For the sake of peace, I thanked him and hung up, then stood at the window looking over the dark fields. I could hear the distant call of cattle, the steady wind through the trees. This land had never betrayed me. People did, but the earth remained faithful. That thought gave me strength. One evening, I caught sight of my reflection in the kitchen window. My face looked older, the lines deeper, but my eyes were steady. Vanessa wanted to use shame to corner me. She wanted me to believe I was alone. But I knew better. I had survived too much to crumble under whispers. I turned off the light and spoke into the recorder. She has the crowd now. She has their sympathy. But when the truth comes, it will be louder than her lies. I will not bend. By the time autumn came, the pressure had grown unbearable. The gossip in town, the stares at the market, the whispers at church. All of it wore on me like sandpaper. Still, I held my ground. I knew I needed help beyond what Mrs. Turner could give. She had been my anchor, but this fight required someone who knew how to use the law as a shield. One evening, after another heated visit from Vanessa, I finally picked up the phone and dialed the number Mrs. Turner had given me weeks earlier. The man on the other end introduced himself as Gregory Miles, an attorney from the county seat. His voice was calm, measured, with the kind of weight that comes from years of practice. I told him everything. My hip injury, the threats, the pressure, the way Vanessa had refused to let me call for help. I told him about the 950 acres already placed in trust and the 300 acres they were still after. I described the posts online, the whispers, the way Nathan had stood by like a shadow while his wife twisted the knife deeper. He listened without interruption, and when I finished, there was a pause. Then he said, "Mrs. Whitfield, what you're describing is elder abuse, plain and simple. You've already taken smart steps with the land trust. What we need now is documentation, testimony, and a clear will that protects your estate from their reach." I glanced at the recorder on the table. I have recordings. I have her words. His tone sharpened. That could be decisive. But we need to handle this carefully. If they suspect you're building a case, they'll tighten the pressure. Do not let them know you've spoken to me. For the first time in months, I felt the knot in my chest ease just a little. "What do I do now?" I asked. He replied, "You keep collecting evidence. Write down every incident with dates and times. Record every threat you can. And we'll prepare a formal will, one that leaves no room for dispute. When the time comes, we'll bring this to court, not just for your sake, but to make sure no one else in this county believes they can treat family this way." After the call ended, I sat at the table for a long time, the lamp burning low. For weeks, I had felt like I was holding back a tide with my bare hands. Now I had someone who could build a wall with me. The next day, Mrs. Turner came by with a casserole and a firm look. I told her about the lawyer. She nodded, satisfied. Good. You cannot fight wolves with bare hands. You need someone who knows how to aim the rifle. That evening, I tested the recorder again. The click of the button, the small red light, the steady hum of silence waiting to be filled. I spoke into it, steady and clear. My name is Clara Whitfield. This is my account of what has been happening. Then I laid out the story from the beginning, each detail crisp, each memory sharp. I ended with, I do this so no one can erase the truth. 2 nights later, Vanessa and Nathan arrived unannounced. They looked tense, and Vanessa's smile was thinner than usual. We're bringing a lawyer next week, she said, dropping the words like stones. He'll explain the law to you, and you'll see you have no choice. I kept my face still. Then I'll be ready to listen. She smirked, mistaking my calm for surrender. Good. Finally, you're learning sense. The recorder in my pocket caught every word. After they left, I wrote another entry in the notebook I had begun. Each page carried the dates, times, and words that cut the deepest. It felt like carving the truth into stone. If they tried to bury me under lies, this book would dig me back out. When the day came to meet their so-called lawyer, I carried the notebook and the recorder in my bag. I knew Vanessa expected me to crumble in front of legal language, to be dazzled into submission. But I had Gregory now, waiting in the wings, ready to counter. The meeting was set at their house, not mine. Vanessa wanted home advantage. She greeted me at the door with that smug smile. Don't worry, Clara. After tonight, everything will be settled. The man they introduced as their lawyer was polished, smooth-talking, and full of certainty. He laid out supposed laws about children inheriting farms, about obligations, about how the county would force me to transfer anyway. His words were rehearsed, his tone dripping with false confidence. I nodded along, feigning confusion, pretending to struggle with the details. Inside, though, I was calm. I pressed the recorder in my pocket, letting it capture every false claim. When he finished, Vanessa leaned forward, eyes glittering. See? You have no choice. Sign the papers, and this will all be over. I met her gaze and smiled, just faintly. I'll think about it. She mistook my patience for weakness again. That was her greatest flaw. She believed cruelty always won. When I returned home, I called Gregory immediately. I repeated everything their lawyer had said, word for word, while the recording played in the background. He listened, then said firmly, "That man is not a licensed attorney. He's lying, and I can prove it. They're trying to scare you with a sham. This is not only abuse, it's fraud." I felt the fire rise in my chest. For weeks I had been painted as selfish, greedy, cold. But now I had their lies on tape, their tricks laid bare. That night, as I sat by the window, the stars bright over the fields, I whispered to the quiet land. They think I am alone. They think I am cornered. But the truth is on my side. And when the truth comes, it will be louder than their lies. The day everything broke open started with a letter from Gregory. He had filed the necessary paperwork in court, securing the trust and preparing for a formal hearing. His words were clear. Do not engage with them anymore. When they come, let them talk. Record everything. We will take this to the judge. I folded the letter and tucked it into the ledger. My hands shook a little, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what was coming. For months, Vanessa had believed she controlled the story. Soon the story would no longer be hers to tell. That evening, their truck pulled up again. I sat at the table, calm, the recorder hidden as always. Vanessa entered first, her heels clicking on the wood floor, her face sharp with triumph. Nathan trailed behind, looking pale and worn. She dropped another stack of papers on the table and pushed them toward me. "This is your last chance," she said. "If you refuse now, we'll see you in court, and you'll lose everything anyway. Do you really want the whole county to watch you get dragged through the mud?" I looked at her, my voice steady. "You've already dragged me through the mud. The court is where the truth belongs." For the first time, her smile faltered. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. "Mum, you don't understand. If this goes to court, it will be ugly. Everyone will know our business. Don't you want to avoid that?" I leaned forward just enough for my words to cut through the silence. "What I want is for my son to remember who he was raised to be. But since that seems impossible, I will settle for justice." The recorder hummed in my pocket, storing every word. The next week, we stood in the courthouse, the old building with its high ceilings and worn benches filled with neighbors and curious onlookers. I walked slowly to the front, my cane tapping against the floor, my hips still aching but my back straight. Vanessa and Nathan sat across the aisle, their lawyer beside them. This time it was a real one, not the fraud they had paraded before me weeks earlier. Gregory leaned close and whispered, "Stay calm. Let their arrogance do the work." The judge entered, and the room hushed. Papers shuffled, voices lowered, and then it began. Their lawyer spoke first, painting me as stubborn, unreasonable, clinging to land I could no longer manage. He used words like selfish and withholding. He gestured toward Vanessa's belly, now rounder with pregnancy, speaking of the unborn child who deserved a future. The crowd murmured. Vanessa bowed her head like a saint, her hand resting gently on her stomach. Then it was Gregory's turn. He stood tall, his voice firm but measured. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a matter of inheritance or generosity. This is a case of coercion, intimidation, and elder abuse." He opened a folder and pulled out my notebook, setting it before the judge. "These are detailed accounts written by Mrs. Whitfield, dated and consistent." Vanessa scoffed, but Gregory ignored her. He pressed a button on a small speaker. My kitchen filled the room, Vanessa's voice spilling out clear and sharp. "You think you're clever. You'll regret this. No one will defend you." The courtroom shifted. Murmurs rose, people turning to look at her. Gregory played another recording, Nathan's voice pleading with me to sign, Vanessa threatening me with shame and lies. Each word echoed off the wooden walls, undeniable. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Is this your voice, Mrs. Reynolds?" Vanessa stiffened. "That could be anyone. She's manipulating the audio." Gregory slid another paper forward. "We had the recordings authenticated. There is no manipulation. These are her words, Your Honor." Nathan's shoulders sagged, his face pale. He looked at his wife, then at the floor. The room felt heavier with every passing second. Gregory continued, his voice steady. "Furthermore, the land in question, 1,250 acres, has already been placed in trust. Mrs. Whitfield has the legal right to protect her estate from exploitation. What the defendants have attempted here is not a family dispute. It is fraud, intimidation, and abuse of a vulnerable elder." The judge tapped his pen against the desk, his expression grave. He turned to Nathan. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Nathan's lips parted, but no words came. He glanced at Vanessa, whose face was twisted in fury, then back at the judge. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mum." The words hung in the air like a crack in glass. Vanessa hissed at him under her breath, but it was too late. The damage was done. The judge leaned back in his chair. This court will not tolerate such conduct. The trust stands. The attempts to coerce and defraud are documented and clear. I am forwarding this matter to the district attorney for review. He looked at Vanessa with a cold stare. You should be prepared for possible charges. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Vanessa's face turned white, then red, then white again. She opened her mouth to argue, but the judge banged his gavel. Enough. This case is closed. I sat still, my cane resting against the bench, my chest tight, with a mix of relief and sorrow. Nathan would not meet my eyes. Vanessa stormed out, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. The neighbors who had whispered about me now whispered about her, their heads turning, their eyes wide. Gregory touched my arm gently. You did it. You stood firm. They cannot take what is not theirs. I nodded, though my throat ached too much to speak. For months I had been silenced, mocked, painted as cruel. Now, in 1 hour, their lies had shattered in front of everyone. As I walked out of the courthouse, the autumn sun fell warm across my face. The fields waited for me at home, steady and endless, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The truth had been spoken, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The days after the hearing moved slower than I expected. I thought victory would feel like fireworks, but instead it settled over me like a heavy quilt, warm yet weighted. The farm was safe, the trust untouchable, the truth finally heard. Still, the cost of it all lingered. Neighbors who once whispered now stopped by to check in. Some brought pies or casseroles, others just sat at the table and let the silence speak for them. A few admitted they had believed Vanessa's story at first, ashamed for being fooled. I told them not to dwell on it, though inside I still felt the sting of their stares at the market, the harsh words that had spread so quickly. People forgive fast when the tide turns, but the memory of being abandoned takes longer to fade. One morning, Nathan showed up alone. He knocked this time, not barging in like before. When I opened the door, he stood there looking older than his years, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. He held no papers, no threats. Only a man carrying guilt heavy enough to drag him down. "Mum," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he walked in slowly, glancing at the familiar walls as if they were strangers to him. He sat at the table, the same table where he had once pressed me to sign away everything, the same table where his wife had sneered at me. Now he looked at it like it was a witness to his shame. He rubbed his hands together, searching for words. I don't know how to start. I let her. I let Vanessa talk me into things I should have stopped. I thought she loved me, that she loved our future, but she only loved what she could take. And I stood by and watched her hurt you. His voice cracked, and he lowered his head. I'm sorry, Mum. I don't expect forgiveness. I needed to say it. I studied him for a long time. Part of me wanted to shout, to remind him of the nights I cried alone, the day he watched while I begged for help, the way he let his wife's laughter fill the barn as I lay in pain. But another part of me saw the boy who once ran barefoot through the fields, who once hugged me tight before leaving for college, promising to take care of me someday. You broke something in me, Nathan, I said slowly. And you broke something in yourself. Trust doesn't grow back overnight. But I hear your words. He nodded, his shoulders shaking. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I want to try. I left Vanessa. I couldn't stay after what she did. after what the judge said. I don't know where to go from here, but I know I can't go back to her. We sat in silence for a long time, the clock ticking loud in the kitchen. Finally, I said, "The farm will not be yours. Not now, not ever in the way you wanted it. But if you are willing to work, if you are willing to rebuild what you destroyed, then maybe there's a place for you here, not as an heir, as a son." Tears slid down his face and he nodded. "I'll do anything. Just let me start." The days that followed were uneasy, but steady. Nathan began showing up early, mending fences, clearing brush, doing the work he had once thought beneath him. He kept his head down, sweat soaking his shirt, his hands blistered. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for praise. He simply worked, as if each nail and board was a small apology. Word of Vanessa's downfall spread fast. The district attorney announced an investigation into her false statements and the fraudulent lawyer she had hired. She left town soon after, her name whispered with contempt instead of admiration. No one believed her saintly act anymore. The same crowd that once pitied her now turned away. I did not celebrate her ruin. Watching her crumble under the weight of her own schemes brought no joy, only a quiet sense of justice. She had built her power on lies, and lies always collapse eventually. One evening, Nathan came into the house after a long day of work. He sat across from me at the table, his face tired but calmer. "Mum, I don't know if you'll ever trust me again, but thank you for letting me be here. I don't deserve it, but thank you." I looked at him, the lines of his face deeper, his eyes no longer shining with Vanessa's fire, but with something more humble. "Trust is not given with words, Nathan. It's earned with time. Keep showing me who you are, and maybe we'll find it again." He nodded, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the boy I used to know. That night, as I stood on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the fields, I felt something shift inside me. The land was safe, the lies defeated, but more than that, the bond between mother and son, though cracked, was not shattered beyond repair. It would take work, patience, and forgiveness, but there was a path forward. The farm had survived droughts, floods, and storms. It had survived greed and betrayal. And now it would survive this, too. The first frost came early that year. I stepped outside one morning and saw the fields shining silver, every blade of grass tipped with ice. The farm looked quiet, almost peaceful, as if it had finally taken a deep breath after months of tension. I wrapped my shawl tighter and leaned on my cane, letting the cold air fill my lungs. For the first time in a long time, I felt steady. The court had ruled, the trust was secure, and Vanessa had left town under the weight of her own downfall. Nathan was still here, working the fields like he should have years ago. Each day he arrived earlier, stayed longer, and though the silence between us often stretched wide, it was not hostile anymore. It was the silence of rebuilding. One afternoon, as we repaired a broken fence together, Nathan paused, his hands gripping the hammer. "Mum, I know I can never undo what I did, but I want you to know, I'm not that man anymore. I see what I became with her, and I hate it. You didn't deserve any of it." I studied him carefully. His voice was raw, his eyes clear. "I know you lost yourself," I said, "but what matters now is whether you find your way back." He nodded, driving another nail into the post. The sound echoed across the pasture, solid and final. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the town's whispers softened. People began to greet me again at the market, some with shame in their eyes, others with cautious smiles. Justice had been seen, and people respect what they cannot deny. But I didn't waste energy on resentment. Holding on to anger would have been its own prison. One Sunday after church, Mrs. Turner pulled me aside. "Clara," she said, "I don't know how you managed to stay so strong through all of this. Most folks would have given in." I smiled faintly. Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about standing up again, even when everyone thinks you're finished. Her hand squeezed mine, her eyes bright. "And now you've shown the rest of us that truth matters more than lies. That means something." I carried her words with me that week, letting them sit in my heart alongside the quiet hope I was beginning to feel again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields gold, Nathan came to the porch and sat beside me. He looked out at the horizon, his hands resting on his knees. "Mum, do you think one day you'll be able to forgive me?" The question hung in the air. I thought about Robert, about the vow I had made after his death to protect the land. I thought about the barn floor, the cold laughter, the silence of betrayal. Then I looked at my son, no longer blinded by greed, no longer standing in his wife's shadow. "Forgiveness isn't given in a single moment," I said quietly. "It's built, the same way we mend these fences piece by piece. But yes, Nathan, I believe one day I'll forgive you, and I believe one day you'll forgive yourself too." His eyes filled with tears, and he nodded. We sat together in silence, the farm stretching wide before us, the frost beginning to settle again in the grass. The farm had endured storms, greed, and betrayal, but it was still standing. And so was I. Justice had been done. Forgiveness was on the horizon. That was enough. Family can be the source of both our deepest wounds and our greatest healing. This story reminds us that justice is worth standing for, even when it comes at a cost. But it also shows that forgiveness, though difficult, can open a path forward. Have you ever had to choose between holding on to anger and letting go for peace? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how you view forgiveness after betrayal.